Hey everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most incredible and, honestly, most overlooked stories in all of American music. It's a story about Chicago and its secret history as the home for a quiet but powerful revolution. So let me ask you a question. When you think about the capital of American folk music, where does your mind go? Probably to the coffee houses of Greenwich Village, right? Or maybe the honky-tonks in Nashville. And yeah, you're not wrong, but that's not the whole picture, not even close. Because for decades, some of the most important, most influential music in the country was actually coming out of these little, smoky, second-floor clubs in Chicago. And this wasn't even a new thing for the city. Way back in the 1920s, the WLS National Barn Dance was broadcasting from Chicago to the entire nation. It's always been a place where sound gets reinvented.
So, how did the folk boom of the 60s and 70s put down roots in the Windy City? Well, like a lot of great stories, it really starts with a couple of guys and a couple of rooms. These were the two pillars that held up the entire scene.
The whole scene basically orbited two key figures, with two totally different philosophies. On one side, you had Richard Harding at the Quiet Night. Harding was the ultimate scout. He was the guy bringing in huge national acts like Bob Marley and Bruce Springsteen for their very first shows in Chicago. And on the other side, you had Earl Pianka at the Earl of Old Town. Earl was the nurturer, the father figure. He created a home, a true training ground for what he called our kids, the local talent that would go on to define the Chicago sound.
This quote tells you everything you need to know about Richard Harding. The man was fiercely independent. He flat out refused to pay off city officials, which, you can imagine, caused him all sorts of trouble. And he was insanely protective of his artists. There's this amazing story of him seeing a drug dealer trying to bother one of his musicians, and he just grabbed the guy, used his old high school wrestling moves, and literally threw him down the stairs.
And then there's Earl Ponky. This quote, it's pure Earl. He was the tough love dad of the scene. So when Steve Goodman writes City of New Orleans, one of the greatest songs ever, Earl doesn't just pat him on the back, he gives him an ultimatum. He was the guy who pushed his kids to take themselves seriously, to turn their art into a real career.
Okay, so these clubs were the soil. Now, let's talk about the incredible talent that grew out of it. And this wasn't just any graduating class. We're talking about artists who would literally change songwriting forever. First up, Steve Goodman. His entire career was this breathtaking race against the clock. He gets diagnosed with leukemia at just 20 years old, and he decides to pour every single ounce of the time he has left into his music. The guy was a dynamo, recording constantly, touring relentlessly, all while fighting this terrible disease. His friends said he looked totally wiped out backstage, but the second he stepped into the lights, he was electric. Then you've got this other story. It almost sounds like a folk tale. It starts with a local guy, a mail carrier from the suburbs. He spent his days delivering letters, and his nights just quietly writing these incredible songs that nobody, not even his family, had ever heard. That mail carrier's name was John Prine. One night, on a dare from his brother, he gets up on stage at this tiny club called the Fifth Peg and plays 3 songs, and the whole room just goes dead silent. You know who one of the first people to recognize his genius was? A young film critic for the Chicago Sun-Times named Roger Ebert. He wrote this review, and it just perfectly captures the magic of seeing Prine for the very first time. But his big break? Oh man, that story is the stuff of legend, and it's all thanks to Steve Goodman. After Goodman blows Chris Christopherson's mind, he refuses to let Chris leave town without hearing his buddy John Prine. So they drag Prine out of bed, bring him down to the empty Earl of Old Town after it's closed, and he plays for just a handful of people. Christopherson was so stunned he said he was absolutely destroyed. He made Prine play every song he knew twice. By the time the sun came up, Prine's life had changed forever. It's the perfect example of the Chicago scene. It wasn't competitive, it was family.
And in this very male-dominated world, there was the absolute force of nature that was Bonnie Kolock. She showed up from Iowa with her guitar and, as the story goes, just some underwear in the case. Harding at the Quiet Night hired her on the spot for the entire summer. Her fame just exploded. She had so much power over her audience that she could demand no smoking during her sets in a smoky Chicago club, and people actually did it. Her shows were so packed, the doorman once had to turn away Paul Simon. There was just no room.
But scenes change, right? Fashions fade. What was once revolutionary can become yesterday's news. So what happened in Chicago when that 70s folk boom started to quiet down? Did the story just end?
Not a chance. The music didn't die, it just evolved. As folk started to wane, its acoustic heart found a new voice in bluegrass. A sound born in the mountains of Kentucky started finding this surprisingly passionate audience in the industrial heart of the Midwest.
And a huge part of that shift was this guy, the mandolin legend, Jethro Burns. After his famous comedy partner passed away, a heartbroken Burns was convinced by his wife to start teaching, and his basement in suburban Evanston basically became a new mecca, a pilgrimage site for a whole new generation of musicians, from local kids to superstars like Paul McCartney, all wanting to learn from the master.
Now, at first, the traditional bluegrass world was pretty skeptical. I mean, Chicago bands would get made fun of at Southern festivals. That all changed one night when the father of bluegrass himself, Bill Monroe, showed up at a club to see the Chicago band Special Consensus. He told them he wanted to hear how they played his music up in Chicago. He said he'd stay for one set. He stayed for all three. That was it. That was the official stamp of approval.
But this story has one more chapter, because that grassroots, do-it-yourself spirit of the 60s folk clubs, it never really went away. It just went underground for a while and was reborn with a punk rock attitude in the 1990s.
While mainstream radio was getting filled with slick pop country, this new sound was bubbling up in the dive bars of Chicago. It was raw, it was honest, and it had this punk rock edge. It needed a name, and the people who started the scene called it insurgent country.
What's so amazing is that it all kind of happened by accident. Bloodshot Records was started by three friends who just wanted to put out one single CD to show people what was happening in their town. But that first album acted like a signal flare, lighting up the sky and revealing this hidden nationwide network of artists and fans who are hungry for something real.
And they did it with that same exact spirit of the old folk clubs. The label's world headquarters was a bedroom. There were no contracts, just handshake deals. They even dug through the trash at major labels to find discarded jewel cases for their own promo CDs. It was the same independent soul, just a few decades later.
So, we've traced this incredible line, from folk to bluegrass to punk country, all of it thriving outside the mainstream, all in one city. But why does this story really matter? What's the big takeaway? Because when you look at it, Chicago's music story was never really about a single genre. It was about an ethos, a set of values. It was a community where artists had each other's backs, like Goodman did for Prine. It was a place where a blue-collar work ethic beat out hype every single time. And it became this sanctuary for sounds and stories that the coasts just weren't listening to. This quote from Sally Timms just nails it. She said Chicago was always a little unfashionable. And you know what? That was its greatest strength. Without the pressure and the hype you'd find on the coasts, artists were free to just get on with the work, build real relationships, and create something that would actually last. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Every city has these stories, its own unsung heroes. What forgotten histories are just waiting to be heard in the basements, the dive bars, and the second-floor walk-ups of the places we all call home?